Welcome to Lady Leadership, the podcast that celebrates and amplifies the voices of inspiring women leaders around the world. I'm your host, Sam McIntyre, and today we have a very special guest joining us. She's the founder of Third Space, an organisation that partners with small, medium businesses to create epic places to work. Welcome, Hareta McMullin, to the show. Welcome, Hareta.
Thank you so much, Sam, for having me.
Now, I'm really excited about this conversation today, and let's just start with how you founded your organisation and tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a background in global HR management, which I actually loved, and I know that's an unpopular thing to say, loving your corporate career, but I did, and I had a great experience. But in my work, which was predominantly focused on developing leaders to lead the organization, right from first-time leaders all the way up through to the C-suite, and then also focusing on employee experience. Then speaking to friends, family, and my wider network, I realized not everyone had the same experience than the one that we were creating at the company that I was with, which was great, according to the feedback that we were receiving. So there seemed to be this mismatch in what I thought was standard and what so many of my wider network were experiencing. So I started to think about why and how I could be part of that solution. And so in terms of how Third Space People came about, it was really this idea on how we can avoid all of these bad, draining, exhausting experiences from happening, because a lot of the stories that I was hearing from friends, family, and colleagues were avoidable, completely avoidable. And I saw the stress on their face and in their life, and I thought, this is not how it's supposed to be. And then that's really the germ of the idea.
Yeah, I love it. And I mean, I think it's really true, isn't it? And I think it's great that you say you enjoyed your corporate career. I've had a, long corporate career as well. And on the whole, I've really enjoyed it and made big change and, really able to influence a lot of people's careers, etc., which I've really enjoyed doing. But you're right, not everyone experience is the same. And, when you're not in an organization that's creating that environment, it can be really tough. How did you go shifting then from your own corporate career to founding your own business?
I think firstly, I had the support of my manager, and the company that I was with really helped and encouraged me to do this on the side whilst working full time. And I'm very grateful for them.
That's great.
No, not everyone has that. So it started off very slowly. I had agreed with my manager to consolidate my hours. So I did my full-time hours in 4 days, and every Friday, everyone within my team and my key stakeholders knew that I was off, and that was my day to focus on starting my business. And I started, I think, how everyone starts, by Googling, how do you start a business? I spoke to...
And did it tell you how to set up an ABN? Was that what the answer?
That was one of the first things.
Yes.
And I went into this world of free lead magnets and checklists and resources and webinars, and got completely and totally, utterly overwhelmed. But that is how I started. And over the past year and a half, I've been able to distill that back and focus my time and my energy. I went on parental leave. So I started this business and then I got pregnant. And then I realized I could not do it all. So I put it on hold, had my baby, enjoyed that time, and then picked it up again when he was about 6 months old. And it was during my parental leave that I decided not to go back to my job and to put all my eggs in this one basket and focus full time on Third Space People.
Love it. I mean, I think that's a really well thought out transition as well, in terms of finding that time, because it is, whenever you start a small business, it is around how you're going to give yourself time to actually work on it, and then explore and discover and find out what works, what doesn't work. So I think though that time piece is really important. And then I think also kind of that confidence piece as well, and that ability to do it. But I think then also the fact that you're having a baby, you're like, do you know what, like, I just want to enjoy that, because that's a really kind of beautiful time, and don't want to put too much pressure on yourself, etc. as well. And great.
Yeah.
And so you talk about, and I've trawled through your website, etc., and you speak about creating a human shaped culture. And so can you elaborate on what that means to you and why it's essential for businesses to have one?
Understandably, when we're running a business, there's a strong commercial focus on what we're doing. We speak a lot in numbers and sales and marketing. Everything we do ultimately leads to a sale, because that's what the business operate, of course. Where I stand, people is one of the biggest costs to your business. And by people, I mean payroll. So it makes, for me, complete commercial sense to manage that cost effectively. And so as a leader, CEO, CFO, COO, if we're not putting the intention and the time and the energy into how we're managing our people and everything that comes along with it, I don't believe that is strong, capable business leadership. So, we approach product development and the customer experience from a human-centered perspective. We teach our sales teams, and we incorporate sales psychology into our processes to try and understand our customer, to ultimately get them on board with what we're selling. And so for me, incorporating that human-centered design piece into how we design our employee experience makes complete sense. And a lot of the challenges that I see come about is because you have an employer who has one set of priorities that are very important. And then you have the employees who ultimately have a different set of priorities. And they're not speaking the same language.
Yeah, that's very true. And it's a really interesting point that you brought up, and I haven't. So we've always, around developing people and coaching people and managing people, for me, it's always been the right thing to do in terms of leadership, etc. I've not heard it referred to around the cost aspect of it and the cost of not doing it. And it's so, and I've worked in corporates for 30 years, and it's not often in the boardroom, you're not really looking at your retention or your attrition or your turnover in a dollar value.
And I dare say, when you put some figures behind that, I dare say many people would be shocked.
Oh, completely.
I'm conflicted in terms of talking about people in this way, because it is not inherently what I'm about. We just talked about the human part of it. Have learned in my career, both within the corporate world and now having started my own business and trying to connect with the priorities of a CEO, COO, HR manager, to talk about it in dollar cents, because I'm trying to speak their language. But it goes both ways. And so I see my role, a huge part of that is bridging that communication gap.
Yeah, but it is, I think it's very relevant in that if you don't do this, then your costs are going to be higher.
Totally.
But doing this type of work and understanding your people and supporting your people differently and talking to them in their language is going to reduce your cost. And we've seen that time in and time out with organizations.
Totally.
Yeah. Love it. So your approach blends evidence-based practice, neuroscience, and energetics. Can you share an example of how this has helped transform a leader or an organization?
So some big words there. To speak in plain English, evidence-based practice is really the tactical elements of HR and how to do something, a process. the neuroscience is a huge part of why I believe I have been able to do what I have done so well. And that's really understanding the why we do what we do and why we behave the way that we do. Energetics is something that I've more recently come into over the last few years, and I've more recently started to incorporate that in my approach, and that really backs up the neuroscience part of it, which is really the why. And so in terms of an example, I ran a leadership workshop with a team late last year, and one manager was really struggling with delegation and burnout, workload, and managing that. From an evidence-based practice, so HR tactics, he didn't know how to delegate and have that conversation.
Wow.
From a neuroscience perspective, he didn't really understand his own limiting beliefs, I want to say, behind the inability to delegate, but also the impact that that was having on his team. So when we went through that, he was able to really understand the impact and the flow and effects of not delegating to both himself and his team. And then from an energetics perspective, once we understood how to do it and why, he was able to energetically back the decision to actually go and make change and do the doing and delegate. So that was great. We ended that session. I came back 6 months later to run a follow-up session. And in that few hours, he personally came up to me and he said, Hareta, thank you so much. I am happier in my life and in my work.
Yeah.
I'm not as stressed. I'm spending more time with my wife and I go home feeling happy. And
tick.
That might not be figures, that might not be down to the bottom line, but whoa, that's life. That's big stuff. And so
he feels more effective, and then the team probably think he's more effective as well.
Absolutely.
And was it to do with was there like trust involved in that? Was there control involved in that? Like, was it his own sort of values? And
a lot of do you mean in terms of why he wasn't delegating?
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons. A lot of common ones is I don't want to put the work on my team. I don't want to burden them. A lot of
I've never had that thought for any teams.
Oh yes.
I'm actually very good at delegating. I would call it one of my superpowers, to be honest with you. So
it's a fantastic superpower to have because everyone benefits from it.
Yeah, but it's the willingness to go to then deal with the outcome. Do you know what I mean? So
totally.
And the kind of responsibility of, well, it might not be how I would have done it, but the job's done.
Totally. And that was the third thing that I was going to say is the bad previous experiences that we may have had that we carry along with us. So we may have delegated, but because we don't know how, perhaps it went pear-shaped and then it ultimately ended up creating more work for ourselves. So we just don't do it anymore because we don't trust that it's going to get done and we think our team is not capable. But often we have to take a bit of a hard look in the mirror and consider whether it was how we communicated that. And so that's a big part of what we went through is how do you actually delegate so that the ultimate outcome that you desire is what's going to be achieved.
And then building that capability in the team. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And them having a go. Yeah. Love it. Great. In today's rapidly changing work environment, what do you see as the most significant challenges facing leaders and businesses, and how do you help them stay ahead of the curve?
In one singular word, I believe it's burnout and the pace at which we're working. I listened to a really great podcast with Deepak Chopra, who mentioned the CEO, The Diary of a CEO.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Stephen Yes.
Bartlett. Yep.
Yes. Fantastic episode.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how burnout is the pandemic of our time. I know we're all over that word, but I believe it's true. I think the pace at which we work is so unsustainable. There's so much data out there that suggests that the world is really feeling it. I mean, there's some recent data that said Australians who are struggling have increased by 40% since 2021. 40%.
Wow.
So let's sink in for a second. The 2022 Microsoft Trend Index for work found that 62% of Australian workers reported being burned out at work. And that's compared to the global average of 48. So not only is half the world's working population burnt out, but roughly 60 odd percent of Australians are. That's a lot of our workforce.
And with a lot of impact then on families, relationships, the economy, etc. Absolutely.
I mean, when you think about the flow-on effects of burnout, we're not able to think clearly, make rational decisions, innovate, be creative. So all of that impacts our ability to do our job well. And if we're still talking dollar terms, bring in money to the business.
So I've led a couple of large teams, and I was always conscious as a leader that I needed to be ahead of the team and pulling the team where we want to go or setting direction, etc. But I was also conscious of, I've got a team of people that work for me. And I delegate, and then I free up my own space, but I can't keep running really hard because they actually need time to catch up. They actually need time to deliver that work before I am piling them with a whole bunch of new work. Or the machine that we're working in is already piling in that new work. And so I was always really kind of focused on priorities and how we're setting all of that stuff up, and like, what is the, and not having too much. And I mean, luckily I worked in tech, and so we, worked in a very agile way, and we were able to make our work visible. We put in processes around signing up for, this is the work that we're going to do in the next couple of weeks. And we would always say to the team, like a buffet, take off the buffet what you're going to eat. Don't take too much stuff off the buffet if you're not going to eat it. So if you don't think you're going to, you can always go back to the buffet if you're still hungry, but don't load yourself up. Like, this is your opportunity to, but then they would still be getting, other people who are wanting a deliverable, like, what's happening with this or what's happening with that. It's difficult. It's the workplace and the work that we do it's a difficult space in terms of delivery.
It really is. I think there's a huge shift that's needed in reflecting on what we're asking of ourselves and of our people. I've burnt out 3 times in my career, but that's because I love my work. I love what I do. I want to help, and it's easy to get sucked into that hamster wheel of go, go, go. And so part of effective leadership, I believe, is being able to filter the noise and filter coming through and stand up and say, we have a lot on our plate at the moment, and if you want quality deliverables, we cannot take on anymore. Or if you want me to do that, great, this is what we're going to drop.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that 100%. And then as an individual, having your own boundaries. And so, absolutely. And not like, I've always really respected, there's a couple of people I've worked with in my career, and they're a bit like clockwork. They get into the office at 8 o'clock, which is still a really early time, or 9 o'clock or whatever it might be. And then they're out of the office at 5:30 every day. Do you know what I mean? And so it's about, I think, it's about kind of trying to, because everyone can be busy. You can keep yourself busy just by looking at your email, but it's around, productive work and effective work, and kind of looking at yourself as well and saying, okay, well, what do I need to do, or what is urgent, or what can I not do, for example.
Exactly. Your work design.
Yeah. Very good. So we've touched there on, well, let's talk about, I think following on that from that, then let's talk about resilience and adaptability being crucial for leaders facing these challenges. And how do you help leaders develop these skills and maintain a positive outlook?
I believe that understanding why people behave the way that they do is crucial and helps so much to contextualize what's happening around us and add perspective. And so when it comes to resilience and adaptability, you're able to process it a bit faster. I think the more that we come up against challenges and the more that we learn how to deal with them, so having the capability to manage change, know how to have those change conversations. What is it that people are looking for when they encounter a change, so that you're able to bring them along on the journey, will help so much. And so when you ask, how do I help people develop these skills? We incorporate neuroscience.
Yeah. And so if someone, this isn't a podcast about me. I reckon I've got quite a bit of resilience. How do you think you develop resilience? This is an interesting one.
I believe that part of it is innate and comes from our childhood and what we faced during our youth and how our parents also modeled that behavior.
Yeah.
And I think that influences how we model that behavior. Do we crumble under pressure, or can we process it and withstand and stand up to it?
Yeah.
As an adult or a leader in the workplace, a huge part of it comes down to self-awareness and self-management. So looking at your emotional intelligence, understanding our triggers and what presses our buttons, and creating, for lack of a better word, solutions to manage those.
Yeah.
So that when we're faced with a challenge and we can feel ourselves getting stressed and our heartbeat raises and our hands start to shake and our voice becomes snappy, we're able to notice that and then take what we need to regulate. And get that to zero. And then when we're able to do that, we can think. And I think that's the key there. When we become emotional, we go through what is called an amygdala hijack.
Yeah.
And essentially that impacts the quality of thoughts that we have. And they're very, very emotional, and they lack perspective, they lack intelligence, and that is why we often say things that we regret because we become hijacked by the amygdala. And
it's
so
that fight or flight. Yeah, I've got a horse, so
yes,
I'm dealing with the amygdala regularly
yes.
because she needs to feel safe. Otherwise.
Absolutely. And so breathing literally allows oxygen up through the brain. It does its thing, and we're able to sit for a second and think through what we need to do. And I believe that when done consistently, will build our resilience.
Yeah. And it's funny, right? Because so I horse ride, and the last couple of days, what I've discovered with my horse, and this is a horse that I've had for 5 years, is that if I bring her into the space where I'm going to ride, and then we just stand there for a while, and maybe I'm scrolling on my phone and she's having a look around, and we breathe, and then I ask her to do a few small exercises and go backwards, like I'm not on her and just on the ground, go forwards, and I get her focusing on me. We have a much better ride. And I don't think it's so much actually about her. I think it's actually about me being more comfortable in the space and understand, and both of us kind of together being relaxed. And previously I used to like run her around for 5 minutes and try and wear her out a bit, and that really wasn't working. And so that breathing, that relaxation, and I think, for people maybe like who are going to an important meeting, getting to the meeting early, sitting there, taking a bit of time, reflecting, understanding, doing some breathing is the best.
You hit it on the head earlier. We feed off of each other's energy, and so as a leader, I think resilience and adaptability is really important, because if we're panicked, people can smell that from a mile away, and it does not inspire confidence in your leadership capability. So being able to manage that is incredibly important to our leadership careers.
Yeah. You could always tell when your mum was annoyed at you.
Yeah.
Or something. Do you know what I mean? You can always tell when you walk in a room and the energy's up, and you can really sort of feel it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the future of work's evolving quickly. How do you see it changing, and what impact do you think it will have an employee experience and leadership?
There are a lot of things that are changing, and I could talk about so many of them. I think one I do want to hit on is what you may know as the skills gap.
Yeah.
So when we think about even up to a decade ago, the skills that we needed remained relatively the same. Whereas now things are progressing so quickly, of course, with technology, that we are needing to consistently upskill ourselves.
Yeah.
So I believe that requires a cultural shift in the importance of training and learning and development. Because if it's one thing that riles me up or makes me so sad, is that I need to go to training. This workshop is over and above everything else that I need to do today, so I'm not going to bring my full attention, and therefore my attention is going to be low and my retention is going to be 10%.
Yeah.
So I believe there's a massive shift required from employers and from senior leadership in incorporating training, learning and development as part of a person's role, so that when you do it, think of it like another project that we're going to do. It's going to be incorporated into our current workload. And if we need to deprioritize something else, so be it. It's not something that's added on top of everything else that we need to do, because that will ultimately undermine the efforts. And so you're investing time and money into this, you might as well prioritize it so that you get the most bang for your buck. So there's a cultural shift there. Once leaders and employers talk about training and learning and development in a really exciting way and make time and energy for it, your people are going to follow.
That's right. I think, you want it to be more a pull than a push, don't you?
Totally.
Because there's nothing worse than you've got to go to this training and someone be like, well, I don't know why I've got to go to that. I've got no interest.
Absolutely. And it's all about how your manager speaks about the training as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, a lot of the work that I've done in the past is, as one example, looking at performance reviews. Now, there's a whole different conversation that we could have around the ideal structure and whatnot, but let's just take it as it is, performance conversations twice a year, which is pretty standard. A lot of managers see that as a chore. And so the language that they use around that, of course, is not going to inspire an employee to put the effort in. And so it's going to become a chore to them as well. And now you've created this negative energy around what is supposed to be a really uplifting and empowering and motivating conversation that ultimately ends up being quite draining. And so I believe that moving forward, if we're able to change how we think about training, learning, and development, we're going to close the skills gap, which means our people are going to have the skills that are needed to take your business forward into the future. And a lot of that is technology, AI, and how we use all of that. But a lot of it is also what we can traditionally describe as our soft skills. How do our people communicate, especially now that everyone's working remotely and we aren't in person? That's not going away. So let's not complain about it. How do we make it work? I have, over my career, worked with people in London, Mexico, US, Europe, Singapore, a lot I've never met in my entire life. And yet I still have great relationships with them. And even though I have not been at my last company now for 3 years, well, no, 1 year. Uh,
It felt
I
like throwing, but yeah.
I still catch up with them on LinkedIn. I still know what's going on in
Yeah.
their lives.
Yeah.
And that is proof to me that you don't need to be in person to create really strong relationships.
And what tips do you have then for listeners that want to develop their leadership skills and create a strong, positive workplace culture?
You have to care.
Yeah, so good. I was gonna answer that question as well and
Yeah.
say, talk to people would be one. You know,
Yeah.
put yourself in. You've got to care. Put yourself in the work. Talk to people. Understand what's going on.
You have to prioritize it.
Mm.
I think a common misconception is that leadership, when you step into that type of role, is over and above everything else that you already have on your plate. But it actually
No, it's a job. It's a job.
It's a job.
It's a
It
job,
actually,
and the job is actually to manage people. The job is to coach people. The job is to mentor people. The job is to help define, help the team. Just help. What can I help with today? I used to have a daily meeting just for 15 minutes with my direct reports, and part of that was, what can I help you with? Be available to the team.
absolutely.
I mean, I could say no, sorry. You need to look at that. But just be available, really. Spend time with people.
Absolutely. And I think a common challenge that I see when people move into leadership roles is they bring along their daily work. They're a subject matter expert in whatever they do. And so they continue doing that while trying to squish in all of this leadership stuff on top. And they very quickly and very easily become overwhelmed because understandably that is too much.
Yeah. And that's where that goes back to the delegation piece that we talked about earlier. You've got to delegate. You've got to step away from your old role and step into your new role.
You do.
What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
So I'm on Instagram at third_space, and I'm on LinkedIn at Hareta-McMullin. You can also visit my website, thirdspacepeople.com.
Lovely. Thank you so much for being on the show. Super important conversation. I know the audience is going to get a lot out of that. And if you're a new leader, delegate, spend time with your team. How can you help them?
Yeah, perfectly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sam.